We're on Daf Nun Amud Bet, and because we did not learn last week because of Purim, so we need to redo what we did last time in order to understand what tonight's sugya will be about. To refresh your memory, we had a Mishnah on Daf Nun Amud Aleph at the bottom, which had no authorship. It's a Stam Mishnah, which tells us that the halacha follows the Stam Mishnah. That's it. And what does it say? It says we don't use the Chalil on Yom Tov, right? And we don't use it on Shabbat. Neither of those. So, therefore, either we're going to use the Chalil for 5 days or for 6 days, depending on whether the first day of Sukkot is Shabbat. If the first day is Shabbos, so then we'll do 6 more days. Each night, they'll play the Chalil. Not only the Chalil, but the Chalil as the most prominent of the instruments, as the first of the instruments, whatever. There are different opinions among the Rishonim. We saw that previously. If the first day of Sukkot is not on Shabbos, Shabbos will be a Chol Hamoed. It will not sound the sound of the Chalil, which means none of the instruments will play in Simchat Beit Shoeva on Shabbat Chol Hamoed. Stam Mishnah. What we saw last time was that there's a Braita that begins with Tana Rabbanan, as most Braita do. It's about 8 lines down from the top on 50b, Nun Amud Bet. There's a little superscript Aleph in my Gemara, at least, the Hechalil. We learned that this is a Tosefta that appears in Perek Dalet. You see there, and here in Masachet Sukka, and also in Erchin. So Tosefta means it's going to be a Braita. Hechalil doche et haShabbat, divrei Rabbi Yosi bar Yehuda. V'chachamim omrim af Yom Tov eino doche. Period. That's the whole Braita. Those 2 lines were the subject of our shir last week, or 2 weeks ago. We learned our last shir. They will be our subject tonight, and maybe next time, if we're not successful getting through the whole thing tonight. What we will see tonight, what we saw last time was the first of 3 interpretations of how to understand what this Braita means. First came Rav Yosef. He will make an assertion about what this Braita means and how it may or may not relate to our Mishnah. He will try to bring a support for his claim, and it will be refuted in one of 2 ways. Way number 1, way number 2. After the refutation of Rav Yosef, essentially, Rav Papa will make an attempt. He too will not survive the withering attack that will be leveled against him, which will bring us to the 3rd person already on the next Amud, who will also arise and try to make an attempt to help us through, and that'll be if we get there, that'll be the story of Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba. Hopefully, we'll get that far tonight. But that's the overview. But it's all centered on these sentences, these 2 statements. Hechalil docher Shabbat. If the Chalil needs to be played on Shabbat, it can supersede Shabbat. We just saw a Mishnah that says it doesn't supersede Shabbos. So what do you mean it supersedes? Di Rabbi Yosef bar Yehuda. Could be just disagrees with the Mishnah. And Chachamim say not only Shabbos, but even Yom Tov it wouldn't. Right? So fair enough. And in fact, if you look in our Mishnah, this seems like it dovetails with the Chachamim. Chachamim said, if Shabbos is the first day of Sukkot, then you're going to have 6 days. But if Shabbos is not the first day, then you're only going to have 5 days out of the 7, accepting Shabbos, Chol Hamoed, and accepting the first day of Sukkot. Oh, that's a Chachamim's view. But Rav Yosef comes to tell us, Amar Rav Yosef, machloket b'shir shel korban. The machloket here in this Braita is about the subject of the shir shel korban. The Rabbi Yosi savar ikar shira b'kli, va'avodahi v'dochet haShabbat. Rabbi Yosi holds that the main song that has to accompany the giving of the korban, any korban, tzibur, any korban chova for that matter, needs to be with instrumentality. That's the instruments are the mainstay. The singing is just accompaniment by the people, by the vocalists, and that shira b'kli is part of the avoda, and therefore it could be docha Shabbos, right? Because it's part of the avoda, and therefore it will supersede any concerns we may have about using instruments on Shabbos. generally Xer Rabban against using instruments on Shabbos, but this is part of the avoda, playing the instruments. Chachamim disagree, right? And the Chachamim say, Rabban and Savri ikar shira bepeh v'lav avoda hi ve'ena docher Shabbat. Right? This Braita, says Rav Yosef, is a machloket Rav Yosef, Rav Yehuda, and the Rabbanan on the subject of what is the main element of shira on a korban. But you know what this Braita is not about? It's not about our Mishnah. It's not related to our Mishnah. And by the by, all right, aval shir shel shoeva, which is our Mishnah, the singing that accompanies the Simchat Beit Shoeva, divrei kol simchi ve'ena docher Shabbat. But the Mishnah stands alone. So the Braita and the Mishnah for Rav Yosef, they're not really related, right? Because everyone agrees that when it comes to the Simcha Beit Shoeva, the music is not being played as part of an avoda. It's just adding to the Simcha. You already had a question?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
So why you can't limit this to just Sukkot then? Because we had Shira and Pesach, we had Shira, right? There's different Shira Shalyom.
Oh, wait, no, okay, we're talking about something else. We're talking about while they were, hold on, we're talking, that's a good question. While the korban is being offered,
Which
right?
Korban? Which
Tabi Shel Shachar, Talmud Ben Harbayim, Musaf, while they're offering a korban, there's a song being sung. Okay?
So,
on days with Hallel, actually, they're in the Shachar, at least they're singing Hallel. Later on, they're singing Shir Shal Yom.
So then what about Pesach?
So they have their own shira. The question here is, this Braita, when it says that the Chalil is Docha Shabbos, and Rabbi Yosi says that, Chachamim say, no, it's not Docha even Yom Tov. Why not? Because the shira here is, question is, when we talk about shira, do we mean people singing, or do we mean instruments being played?
So what I'm saying is this not limiting to Sukkot.
Yeah, it's anytime. Yeah, right. Anytime. This Braita is in general. The Chalil will overtake Shabbos, says Rabbi Yosi, Rabbi Yehuda. Come say, no, not even Shabbos, not even Yom Tov. Never mind Shabbos, won't take over Yom Tov. Yeah, the Rabbi Yosi's point is, but both Rabbi Yosi, Rabbi Yehuda, and the Chachamim agree that when it comes to the Simchat Beit Shoeva, the music's not part of an avoda; it's just music, background. So you definitely can't play instruments there. You can't play the Chalil. No. Because we're worried it could break and whatever. Yeah, we don't have a justification for it. So then Rav Yosef tries to explain, how do I know this? Why do I say that this is true? Because Rav Yosef just gave us his understanding of this Braita. Again, it will be challenged, but first he tells Mina Amina Dibahachi Plige instead of Dibahah, the Hagar Abbas Dibahachi Plige. The Tanya, because we learn right elsewhere in Shas in different places, Menachot, etc. What does it tell us? Sota and Menachot. Kleishar Shasa'an Shel Eitz, Rabbi Posel, Rabbi Yosi Bar Yehuda Machsir. See, Rabbi Yosi Bar Yehuda is there again, and he allows us to use something made out of eitz. Now, generally, as we'll see momentarily, Kleisharet, things that are going to be used as equipment in the Beit HaMikdash, needs to be made out of metal, preferably gold. Can't be made out of wood, unless you think it can be made out of wood, which is exactly what Rabbi Yosi, Rabbi Yehuda seems to be saying, right? So Rabbi says that's possible. Rabbi Yosef Yehuda, same Rabbi Yosef Yehuda, who holds you could play a Chalil on Shabbos. Why? Because he thinks the Chalil is an Iker part of the Avoda, because the Iker Shira is Bekli. So Maila Bahaka Miflagei. This must be what they're really arguing about. Mandamachshir Savar Iker Shira Bekli, V'alfinan Me'abuva de Moshe, Mandapasil Savar Iker Shira Bepeh, Velo Yalfinan Me'abuva de Moshe. So the assumption here is, maybe the argument must be the following. The one who thinks this is kosher, Rabbi Yosef Yehuda, who thinks that you could use wooden instruments. He holds that you could use wooden instruments. And what's an example of a wooden instrument? The Abuva de Moshe. There was a special Chalil that they said was from the time of Moshe Rabbeinu. It was made out of wood. It sounded better as a wood instrument than a metallic instrument. They used to play it as the Chalil when they gave a korban. So, says Rabbi Yosef ben Yehuda. You know why says Rav Yosef? Do you know Rabbi Yosef ben Yehuda seems to maintain that wooden instruments are okay? Because he thinks wooden clay sharet aspects of the avoda, vessels could be made out of wood, because he holds that Iker Shira Bekli. And because he holds Iker Shira Bekli, and it could be made out of, he says it could be made out of wood, and we know that the Chalil was the Chalil Abuva de Moshe, it was called. Again, it was literally Moshe's or not, I don't know. Originally, I'm sure it was, but after, I don't know. But they would use that one. when they were playing the music over a korban. Iker shira b'kli, and the kli can be made out of wood. That's consistent. That's Rav Yosef's view of Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda. And Rabbi holds like the Chachamim, that you cannot actually say that the Iker shira is b'kli. Really, the Iker shira must be bapeh, and the musical instrument is an appurtenance to help the people sing better. And therefore, even though Rabbi, and by extension the Chachamim, hold that you need to have only metallic clay sharet, the instruments can be made out of wood. You know why? Because they're not really clay sharet. You know why? Because they're not really part of the avoda. They're playing, is your pardon the expression, second fiddle to the voices that are really doing the singing during the time of the offering of a korban. The shir shel korban, iker shira b'peh for the Rabbanan. Rabbi Yosef Yehuda, iker shira b'kli. Mark, a question?
Yeah, just quickly, just to remind me, is there any way or anyone who holds that if the shira was done primarily through the flute, that the flute could be wood? Or is it assumed that if it's primary, it can't be wood, it's got to be metallic?
According to Rabbi Yosef Yehuda, it could be it must be primary, and it must also be wood, because he thinks you could make vessels for use in the mikdash out of wood.
Okay,
And there was specific positions consistent throughout.
you got it. I missed that. Okay.
Yeah, okay, no problem. But the Gemara doesn't like Rav Yosef's ostensible proof.
But if it's saying you can make it out of wood, or you must make it out of wood?
No, you can make it out of wood, but when it comes to the Chalil, you would only want to make it out of wood. Rashi points out, doesn't sound nice when you make it out of copper. Basically, doesn't work. So you need to make it out of wood, because as a reed instrument. Yeah.
Okay.
So that was Rav Yosef's proof to why and how he felt that the argument between Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda, and the Rabbanan about whether you could use a Chalil regularly on a Shabbos when they're doing the Shir Shel Korban, Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda says anytime, including Shabbos, and Rabbanan say not Shabbos, not even Yom Tov, is really, according to Rav Yosef, a machloket about Iker Shir B'kli or Iker Shir B'peh. Rav Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda, Iker Shir B'kli. And we know that, therefore, it will supersede, the use of those instruments supersedes Shabbos. And by the way, says Rav Yosef, you know how I really know this? Because he even holds you could use a wooden instrument as part of the Kli Sharet. You know why he holds that? Because the instruments that they used were, at least the Chalil itself, was not a metallic instrument, but a wooden instrument. And he generally thinks you can use vessels and utensils made out of wood in the Beit HaMikdash. That's Rav Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. And Rabbi says, no, you cannot do that. So they say to Rabbi, what about the fact there was a reed instrument made out of wood they were playing when they had the Shishol Korban? He says, yeah, but I hold Iker Shira B'peh. The fact that there was a wooden instrument is of no moment. It's not a Kli Sharet. It's not, doesn't have a function except to, as I used the expression before, second fiddle to the voices. That's really the Iker Shira. When the Torah says there has to be Shira on a Korban, the Shira on the Korban is with your voice, not with the sound of instruments. And the Gemara now says to Rav Yosef, lo, the Kule Alma Iker Shira B'kli. No. Everyone in this argument that's going on here with between the question of whether or not you can have Shira B'kli. Everybody thinks you can use Shira B'kli. The argument between Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi in this argument about whether a Kli Shar can be made out of wood or not is an argument about whether or not the fact that we're stuck when it comes to the instrument that's used, called the Chalil, aka Abuva de Moshe, that was the name of it, whether that means we're going to learn a rule from that, or we're going to say it's the exception to the rule because we have no other choice. That's where we ended last time. In other words, the rejection of Rav Yosef is not what Rav Yosef said about the Braita at the top of your page, close to the top of your page. It's Rav Yosef's ostensible proof. Your proof is no good, Rav Yosef. Sorry. But you want to argue that the argument between Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi about whether Kli Shar can be made out of eights is proven because of the Abuva de Moshe. That's not good. You know what? Rabbi also holds the Iker Shira B'kli. The argument that we have in general about whether Kli Shar can be made out of wood is not related. You can't include the Abuva de Moshe. You know why? Because there's no other option. It doesn't sound nice if you make it out of some other material like metal. Today we'd say like out of plastic. No, it has to be made out of wood. But that's not a rule that you're learning about everything else that's in the other clay sharet. You're not stuck when it comes to the shovels and the bowls and the tongs and whatever else. That all has to be made out of metals. So the kulam ikashir b'kli. Kulam means both Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi. V'hacha b'danin afsham she'efshar kamiflegei. The argument between Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi is whether we apply the principle of whether we're dan efshar mishi efshar. Efshar means you could make such and such, whatever the such and such is, out of wood or out of metal. Are we going to learn that that is an option from a case like Abuva Demosa where there was no such option? You couldn't have made it out of metal. It would sound good. It has to be made out of reeds. So man de machshir savar done in efsham shi efshar. The one who's machshir, named Rabbi Yosef Yehuda, says, aha, not only do I think ikar shir bakli, but by the way, you can learn from ikar shir bakli the fact that you're stuck and you have to use a wooden instrument teaches you that anything could be made out of wood in the Beit HaMikdash. And Rabbi says, no, the only reason you're allowed to use a wooden instrument, I agree with you, by the way, I'm sorry, I agree with you, ikar shir bakli, you're right. But when it comes to these instruments, some instruments are metallic, but this one could not be of anything except for eights. There's no choice. That's not a rule that we're going to extrapolate to everything else. It's an exception to the rule. Done in F. The argument is done in Efshar mishi Efshar kamiflegei. Man de machshir savar done in Efshar mishi Efshar. Man de pasil savar. Right, the one who's posel says ain. It should be low, but ain done in Efshar mishi Efshar. Yeah. So that's the first rejection of Rabbi Yosef's proof to say, you know what, both Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi might agree that ikar shira bakli, but they're not arguing about ikar shira on a korban, whether it's kli or peh. They're arguing about whether you learn a rule out of an exception or you just say it's an exception.
So if everyone agrees, then everyone agrees it's Dochas Shabbat.
You're one step out. You're above. You're hovering over this. We're now we went down a floor. In other words,
we're arguing about two things then now. Whether it's
okay, but I'm trying to remind you that the progression, that's why it's confusing, and we had to go back this week. Otherwise, we're not going to get to the next step, which in this reaction, which is there's a Braita, and we're trying to understand the Braita. Rav Yosef says, I'll explain the Braita to you, and then he says, I'll tell you the proof. And now the Gemara says, that's not a good proof, Rav Yosef, and we'll tell you why. Because maybe the people in your proof are not arguing about the same thing that's in that Braita that we started with, about Shir Shel Korban. Maybe they agree Shir Shel Korban is with a Kli. Maybe they both agree with that. Maybe Rabbi, maybe he's not Chachamim, he's Rabbi. Maybe Rabbi agrees with Rav Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda, that you could play an instrument on Shabbos, it's Dochas Shabbos. Maybe. Yeah. That's not really what they're arguing about. They're arguing about whether the fact that one instrument among the many instruments in the Beit HaMikdash happened to have been of wood because they had no choice means, so therefore it means with everything else you do have a choice? Because with that one there was no choice. You say, no, that was no choice. But everything else, you have to aim for metal. That's the mitzvah. You follow? So the first dechia of Rav Yosef was not Rav Yosef's interpretation of the Braita, it was the proof that he brought. Because really you could have read the machloket, which was the proof machloket, supposedly, as a machloket not related. It could be on one side of the ledger of understanding that Braita. So we have a Braita, and you could say, Rav Yosef says, you know what the title of this Braita is? What is Ikar Shir Shel Korban? Kli or Peh? That's what he thinks it is. And I'll show you how I think it's true, and he brings a proof. And we say, that's not a good proof, because you could take that proof, and you could slide it over under the column of Ikar Shira B'Kli, and explain that the machloket is taking place within it. And we just explain how that's true. Because, right? You understand why? Because we're saying that the argument between Rabbi and Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda, may not be about what is Ikar Shira on a Korban, Shir Shel Korban. The issue might just be whether or not we're going to extrapolate from a case where we're stuck to all the other cases that are out there. From the vessel that must be made of wood to all other vessels, Rabbi Yosef says, yeah. And Rabbi Yehuda says, no. So, sorry, Rabbi Yosef, that's not a good proof on your, to claim, for what you want to claim as the interpretation of that Braita that was the beginning of this whole discussion. And the Gemara now does the next thing, and now's the new part for tonight. It takes the same argument between Rav Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi, and it says to Rav Yosef, excuse me, not only could we put that whole machloket under the column of Ikar Shira B'Peh and claim that the argument between Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi is about something else, namely whether we learn from exceptions to the rule to the whole rule or not. But let me tell you something the Gemara says next. We're going to control copy and control paste. We're going to take the same machloket, Rav Yosi, Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbanan, and Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, okay, the argument about whether Kli Shir can be made of eights. We're going to pick it up, and we're going to slide it. I'm going to say copy it. We're going to copy it also under the column of Iker Shira B'Peh. And we're going to say, you know what? You could also assume that both Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Yehuda Nasi both hold that Iker Shira B'Peh, and they're having an argument about the issue of whether Kli Shir can be made out of eights. It's going to explain now how that could be true. So I'm just showing you the structure. We have, again, if you want to see it visually, people who are on the phone, right? We have the Braita at the top, and the Braita is undefined. What's its context? What are they arguing about? Rabbi Yosef Yehuda says you could use a Chalil on Shabbos for a korban, and Rabbanan say no, not even on a yontif. So Rav Yosef said, "Oh, this argument is clearly about what is the ikar of the shir shel korban? Is it the kli, or is it the singing?" And he says, "Now here's my proof." And the Gemara says, "Well, that's not a good proof." First of all, it's not a good proof because, and this is what we saw last time, which is reviewed now, you could say both in that so-called proof, both opinions hold Iker Shir B'Kli, and we're going to show you how both opinions could hold Iker Shir B'Peh. Okay, so on Iker Shir B'Kli, let's say they both agreed. The Iker Shir, I remind you, and here's where it's a little bit confusing, just to keep the variable straight. The constant in all of this is a person named Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, but the variable, so to speak, is that in the original Braita at the top, it's Rabbi Yosef Yehuda versus Rabbanan, a collective, a majority. But in this proof, it says Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. He's not necessarily agreeing with the Rabbanan. Okay? So we just did one side of the ledger. Now we're on the other side of the ledger, we're sort of, again, copy-paste. The same argument that was between Rabbi Yosef Yehuda and Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, we have it again. Right? So I'm about 2/3 of the way down the page. Right? The first word on the line is Afsar, and then it says V'ibait Ema. Afsar, and this is V'ibait Ema. So again, 50b, about 2/3 way down the page. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 13 so lines up from the bottom. V'ibait Ema Tekule Alma Iker Shira B'Peh. V'ain done in Afsar Mshi Afsar. You know what? Maybe we could say everyone holds that Iker Shira is really B'Peh. There's nothing to do with the instruments that are played there in the background. And you know what? When we're stuck, we're not going to learn Afsar Mishi Afsar. We're not going to learn, that you can make anything out of wood just because there's one thing in the Beit HaMikdash that has to be made of wood because there's no choice. We're not going to do that. But v'hacha b'meilaf menorah b'klali uprati or b'ruibuye umeyute kamiflage. Made a mistake. I should have told everyone to have a chumash. There's no other way. I'm sorry. There's no other way. It's wasting our time otherwise. I don't put it on the screen to people on the screen. If you're in Alabama, you don't have a chumash. I'm sorry. I should have thought of this before. It's a waste of time otherwise. If you don't see it inside, just open up hand. You're not going to understand what's happening. It's too
Rabbi, I have Safari. I'm good.
I have Safari? Okay. Good. Okay, I can put it on the screen though. I don't care. I'll put it on the screen also though. I'll load up my Safari. So what the Gemara is going to, I'm sorry, I poor planning on my part. What the Gemara is going to do now is it's going to say, okay, look, we have the argument really is going to be about how we darshan. It's a methodological question. How do we darshan psukim that we find in the Torah? How do we understand them? There's two different systems, and they are essentially at loggerheads because they're two interpretive modalities, for lack of a better term, and they work basically as follows. The first one because Rabbi Yishmael tells it to us every single day. We keep reading it every single day. So that one is pratu klal frat, pratu klal, klalu fratu klal. Right? That one everybody knows, and it's that's fine. Yeah, we're good. We got that one down pat. That's not an issue. Yeah, everybody's happy with that. The other one though is called ribui and miut. And ribui and miut would be an expansion and I would call it a limitation, right? Expansion and a contraction, or expansion and a limitation on that expansion. I'm going to explain it in longhand now, but you have to understand what the words themselves mean. And in the Gemara, we have the argument is with regard to the menorah. beklali ufrati or beribuye umiyute kamiflage. Rabbi Darish klali uprati. Rabbi Yosi bar Yehuda Darish ribuye umiute. And it's going to explain what this is. But basically what the Gemara is now saying is, Rav Yosef, this argument is not about shir shel korban. When Rabbi Yosef, Yehuda, and Rabbi have an argument about whether klei shor can be made out of wood, they're fundamentally arguing about how to interpret the psukim in Parsha Truma regarding the menorah. Now, why is the menorah the one that's picked? Because it's completely made out of gold.
It can't be wood.
Yeah, well, because the aron is made out of wood and the shulchan is made out of wood and they're covered in gold. But the menorah, that's like the headquarters. I saw last time, I think I brought in the Sfas Emes, that he says, well, the point is that that anything covered in gold, it's like it's made out of gold. But it picked on menorah because that's where you could learn the Chalil Prat. That's what the Gemara chose to do. And the Gemara explains here. What?
It says in the Torah, Zahav Torah.
Right. So here, so Rabbi Darish Klali Uprati Vasita Menorat Zahav Tahor. Now that I actually spent the time finding it, I should put it on the screen. Pasuk Lamed Aleph 450. So we have Vasita Menorat Zahav Tahor right there. So we know the material has to be made of is pure gold, right? Then we have a prat, a detail, miksha te'aseh hamenorah, right? Has to be no, sorry. Vasita, I made a mistake already. Vasita menorat is the klal. Zahav tahor is the prat. Thank you. Sorry. And miksha te'aseh, that's again the klal. Miksha te'aseh hamenorah. Sorry, I'm looking at the wrong spot. I'm going up and down. Right? Those few words. Right? Vasita menorat zahav tahor, miksha te'aseh hamenorah equals klal uprat uchlal. Make the menorah. How do you make the menorah? Make it out of pure gold, and you should make the menorah out of one piece, basically. So you have here the klal, the prat, and the klal. Rebbe uses klal, prat, klal. Rabbi Shmuel uses klal, prat, klal. And what do we have here? Klal ufrat uchlal yatadan ela ke'ein haprat. Ma prat mefurish shel matachet, af kol shel matachet. Right? And of course, we're left with a little bit of a question. Well, why not zahav specifically? Why matachet generally? We'll leave that as a hanging question, which we may or may not get back to tonight. But it's at least a good question, no? It said specifically pure gold. So Chazal learn any metal. How come? We'll have to come back to that, so that we'll leave that hanging for now. But metal, matachet. So any metal. Rabbi Yosi bar Yehuda reads the same pasuk, but he reads it as a ribui umiyuti. So here we have the following: Vasita menorat is the riba, means you make the menorah, meaning out of anything. Zahav tahor mi'et, that's a limitation, draws it in. But miksha te'aseh hamenorah chazar v'riba, that went again to the wide, to the expansive. So when you have riba umi'et v'riba, riba hakol. When you have the general, the expansive, the limiting, and the expansive, it means to tell you you can do anything you want. It's all open-ended. Strange, yeah? But that's how ribuy miut works. And you say, well, why should that be? Right? So the ribuy at the beginning is nitrabe hakol. The prat hasheni is the miut, right? Only that which is just like the prat, meaning it has to be like that which came around that in that realm a little bit, right? But the second ribuy opens everything up, and it will just prohibit or limit whatever was in the miut itself. But anything that's like the miut is not removed. So to say it in a different way, in the words of Rabbi Yosef Yehuda, he thinks that you could make the menorah out of anything, right? It's not mifurish what you make it out of. You'll ask me, so then why did it have to mention Zahav Tahor according to him? Because that's how it was made by Aaron HaKohen, by Moshe Rabbeinu, because that's what Hashem told him to do that time. But if they would ever have to make another menorah, you can make it anything you want. Anything, including wood. The Gemara says the machloket Rabbi Yosi, Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi is a machloket about how to read psukim methodologically. But you know what? They both agree that ikar shira b'peh. Both agree with the mouth, and therefore Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda, right? He thinks that's just a reality. You're allowed to ikar shira b'peh, and therefore whatever he's arguing and the Chalil being doches Shabbat earlier on, back on the top, it's not related to this proof of Yosef. Maybe yes, maybe no, but we'll have to figure out another reason. But it's not what you said. It's not your rationale. It didn't work. Yeah, wait, George first. I just hand up and then Art. Sorry.
bShabbat, why is that a limit? To me, that's a limiting factor. It's not a general. I mean,
It's not limiting. Mikshat Yasam Nora was the expansive. Zahav Tahor was the limiting.
That was my question too. Why is it a reboot?
I'm not sure why it's a reboot. Yeah.
The point is that it's just telling you that it's going to be the way you're going to make it is out of hammering it out, but you can make it make shat te'asam nora out of what? Anything you want. Just like Vasita Minorat is read as make the menorah out of whatever you like. So too, Miksha Te'asam Nora, it's focused on the words Te'asam Nora. You can hammer it out whatever you want. You're right. You could have read it as, well, it doesn't have to be something that's hammered out. You don't hammer out wood.
Right. You don't care.
That's how the Gemara is interpreting it. The Gemara is interpreting it. By the way, Rabbi might win. Rabbi wins. Rabbi says Klal Frado Klal. And since the Prat said Zahav, so it has to be at least Zahav, not Zahav. So some other Matachat, but something you can hammer. Yeah, what are you going to say, Sully? I'm sorry.
No, so it's both, and whichever way you do it, it should be metal.
Yeah. Okay, but according to Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda, he thinks that Kli Shard can be made out of eights. And we learn it from Menorah, because even though it does mention in the middle some limitation about Zahav Tahor, it expanded it again. So the expansion afterward canceled out the limitation. It makes the limitation like some kind of beautiful Mahadran or something, but it's certainly not Liikuva. Art's next, and then Jeff. Art.
So well, my question was the same as George's. That, but what you're saying then is that the way it comes out by the Ribui and the Miyud is that the Zahav Tahor only applied to the original menorah, but
it sounds to me that way, yes. Otherwise, I don't know what it's doing there.
Rabbi, can you repeat the question when they ask? I can't hear the questions.
Yeah. George wanted to know if it said Miksha Teaseh Hamnora. That sounded like a limitation. I was pointing out that Miksha, he's right, but for some reason, Chazal are focused on Teaseh Hamnora, make the menorah. Like it says V'asita Menorat at the beginning of the pasuk. So to repeat it again, Teaseh Hamnora is sort of the end point. So it was an expansion, a limitation, an expansion, basically cancels it. And Art pointed out that he had the same question as George, but he was pointing out, or rather asking me to clarify, does that mean that when it said Zahav Tahor, could it mean that mute, that limitation was the first time they made it, Moshe was being told by Hashem, you make it out of gold. Sounds that way. But in the future, if you ever do it again,
yeah,
it doesn't have to be of gold. And Prat, which is Rebbe's position, which is Rabbi Yishmael, etc., is that when you have a Prat that's bracketed between two klalim, the Prat informs the klal. Klal ufratu klal iyata dan ela ke'ena prat. Has to be something that's ke'en, like the Prat. The Prat is Zahav Tahor. It's a metallic item. You need something else that's made out of metal if you're not going to be able to build it out of gold. Right?
By the way,
thank you.
Teaseh passive.
Yeah, it means the menorah should be made out of one piece, not that you should make it out of one.
Yeah, go fair enough. Okay. Yeah, fair enough. So that's the machloket, and the point of bringing this whole thing up, right? He's basically saying that this is not a good argument, Rav Yosef. Your proof is not really working because we were able to explain your proof machloket as actually being on one side of the ledger, that everyone in the story might agree ikar shira b'kli, or everyone might agree ikar shira b'peh. So what kind of a proof is that? It's so malleable that it's not really helpful to try to prove your point. So the Gemara here says, right? So the second to last line, my Rabbi komile. It allows for everything. My mi'et, it has to be mi'et something. There has to be some kind of limitation left on zahav from zahav tahor for the future. Something. Oh, miyet shel cheres. If you try to make it out of earthenware, that's way too far afield. You'll ask me, why is earthenware so far afield, but wood is closer? Ani lo yodea. I'm not really sure. That's what it said. Is that, and look at Rashi, right? Dal korchach miyuta lemeute ata v'zel aroy litmeid yoter min hakol. Because against your will, you have to say that the miyuta had to be mimayit, has to limit something. So what is it? Something that is very far away. But my presumption is, I think someone said this near the Marsha, cheres is so low as an object. It's pottery. It's a poor man's vessel. That you definitely can't. You can have something ornate made out of gold, silver, copper, titanium, whatever you want to say. Maybe even out of woodworking, but you're going to make it out of clay. That's very low.
That's why you can't capture it.
And you can't kosher it. That's true too. But the point is, there has to be something left from the miyut. Riba, umiyet, riba, riba hakol. But the miyut, something has to do something bisman hazeh. So Art and George, refining what I said before, maybe it wasn't exactly as I said, that it's only the first time it has to be made out of gold. After that, can be made out of anything, but not cheres. That's too far. That's too low. The point here is that whatever Rav Yosef was trying to prove, he didn't really prove. And so we're kind of left with Rav Yosef, your whole claim about trying to understand the machloket on the top. We should have put it, if it was, with kids who don't know how to look things, you give them a highlighter. That's what we're trying to understand. That sentence is the subject of this whole Gemara. So the last line of the Gemara here, Amar Rav Papa, Kitanoi. Rav Papa comes along, tells us, you know what? This argument here is really Kitanoi. And what is that argument? The machloket of whether ikashir b'kli and ikashir b'peh is really an argument that has centers on the question of who does the playing of the music? Because if the music is part of the avoda, then only someone who's empowered to sing or to play can do it. Like the uvYom, that was their job, singing. So instead they had to sing, literally they had to sing with their voices, but also literally they had to play instruments, or literally they had to play instruments and also they had to sing. Well, if some extras, lahavdil, could be brought onto the set to play the music, then it's clearly not part of the avoda by anyone's standard. And therefore, says Rav Papa, let me just point out, here's a three-way machloket about who gets to hold the instruments. Kitanoi, avdei kohanim hayu, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yosef, these were the slaves of the kohanim. They're not kohanim, they're not even Jewish. Wait, you have a question, Ira?
No, I'm just confused. Why is the Gemara, in my version, it has the Tanya in parentheses?
It's supposed to be Ditnan. Because the Tanya means a Braita, right, and the Tanan is a Mishnah. And this is quoting a Mishnah from Erkin. It should be the Tanan. If you look at the Masorah Shas, it tells you the Tanan. Kitanai, the Tanan, thank you. Avdei Kohanim Hayu, Diva Rabbi Meir. These were Avadim. They're Avadim of the Kohanim. They gave him a job. The slaves, they brought them in. You play the music. Rabbi Yosi, Omer, Mishpachat Beit HaPegarim, Mishpachat Beit Tzifraya, Amam Hayu. These are different families and the place they were from. Shehayu Mesian Lekahuna. They're Yisraelim. But they would marry into the families of the Kohanim because they were a very good lineage. Yuchsin. Rabbi Chinan ben Rav Tignus Omer uvYom Hayu. According to that third opinion, uvYom Hayu, you know why they were uvYom? Because uvYom do the part of the avoda called Shira. Shir Shal Korban. So if you take that view, then clearly, Shir Shal Korban is really about the instruments, because uvYom had to do it. But according to the other two opinions, maybe Ikar Shira B'Peh, since you're allowing non-uvYom do the playing of the instruments. So Rav Papa says, the original argument back and forth between, in a way, Rav Papa is also, I guess, a refutation of Rav Yosef. He's giving an alternate, you'll see, the alternate, about how to understand that Braita. But he's saying to Rav Yosef, like, you think there's an argument between Rav Yosef Yehuda and the Chachamim about Ikar Shira B'Peh or B'Kli? No, that's already in the Mishnah, in Erchin. It says so. 3 are machloket. 2 out of the 3 opinions hold non-uvYom could do it. Third opinion says only uvYom because they think Ikar Shir B'Kli. Maybe that's it. So my la baka miflige demanda amar avadim hayu kasavar Ikar Shir B'Peh umanda amar uvYom hayu kasavar Ikar Shir B'Kli. Maybe the one that holds it could be literally Avadim. The Iker Shira is Bepes because they're in the background. The one that says LeVium holds the Iker Shira Bakli because that's why it's part of the, since it's part of the Avoda that they have to play instruments, going to be the Yidden who are LeVium. Vitisbara, is that logical? Rabbi Yosi, my Kasavar. What does Rabbi Yosi hold? Remember what Rabbi Yosi said? So you had three opinions here in the Mishnah. Avade Kohanim, number one. Number three was the only Levium. But number two was Yisraelim, who are not Kohanim and are not Levium, but they're at least Yisraelim. So what is his opinion? Ikasavar Ikashira Bepeh, if he holds Ikashira's Bepeh, Safilu Avadim Nami. Ikasavar Ikashira Bekli, Levium in Yisraelim Lo. Rabbi Yosi is properly placed. It's not really Shita's 1, 2, and 3, but Shita's left, right, and center. Where are you going to slide Rabbi Yosi, who's in the middle between these two polarities?
Mm-hmm.
He's not anywhere. In other words, the organization is trying to show you that sometimes when you see these sequentially, the Mishnah sequences something. The Gemara will teach us that the reason why it's sequenced is not because it's like A, B, C, because there's like a nice order, but to show you have extreme 1 and extreme 2. And in the middle, where do you want to slide that person in the middle? He's not in category 1 and not in category 3. He's category 2. He's somewhere in between. So that's what they're pointing out. Ella, rather, the Gemara concludes, contra Rav Papa, who wanted to argue the whole argument of Iker Shira, the Kli or Bepeh is really a Mishnah, and it's here. No, the Kli am Iker Shira Bepeh. Maybe everybody holds Iker Shira Bepeh. Uvehaka miflagei. Here's what they're really arguing about. Demar Savar Hachi Havamaisa. Umar Savar Hachi Havamasa. You know what they're arguing about? Jewish history. What actually happened? Who actually did it? So the Gemara says, seriously? L'may nafkamina. The Mishnahs just tell me history because it's nice to know. It's not a history book. So what? That's it? What's the practical difference? Answers the Gemara, I would say, for lack of a better term, public policy considerations. What lesson will be learned and extrapolated from lookers on? Observers will see that there is a platform and there are Levium singing. According to this, we're trying to say Iker Shira Bepeh. And behind them, there are people playing instruments. So we'll wonder, the argument between these three opinions is, will we be ma'aleh from the duchan, the platform where the Levium stand in order to sing, but also where the instruments are playing, from the platform to yuchsin, marriage issues, and maser for the function of giving them maser, as is given to Levium. And here we understand it. And so he's going to unpack it. Manda amar avadim hayu, those who hold that it's slaves, kasavar ein malin meduchim liyuchsin v'lamaser. Everybody knows that slaves are playing the instruments.
Yeah.
They're the band. They're the hired help. Nobody's going to think, oh, if they're standing up there, we can marry them. Nobody. They'll realize they're avadim. Umanda amar Yisrael hayu, second opinion, category 2 of Yosi, kasavar malin meduchim liyuchsin. Well, look at the families. Oh, this is from a fine family. If they got to be playing in the Beit HaMikdash, you're playing the Mikdash. That's a big thing. So they would for Yosin. Aval lo lamas, they're not going to expect. They're not going to conclude that they must be Levium. No. Umanda amar Levium hayu kasavar mali miduchan bein liyosin bein lamaser. The third opinion says no. We have to make sure that those people who play instruments are only Levium. You know why? Because anybody who shows up to give a korban is going to be looking. That guy looks interesting. I have a granddaughter or something. I'm going to fix her up with him because he's a Levi. Therefore, he has to be a Levi. So the three-way machloket, the Gemara concludes, is really a public policy question. But me'ikar hadin, ikar shira b'peh, not the kli. It's background. But people will extrapolate from the visuals, and they'll either start giving them maser, or they'll marry them to their daughter, and maybe it's an eved, maybe it's right. And the machloket is, how far are the people going to actually extrapolate? So those are the two approaches. And I have boys coming to my house in about 15 minutes. So I don't think we're really going to get to too far into Rabbi Abba. But when we gather next, which will probably next we'll have one more shir, I think. One more shir next week, is Rabbi Yirmiyah Bar Abba will say, Rav Yosef's totally wrong. Rav Yosef's interpretation of that Braita back on 50b, incorrect. I'm going to tell you what that machloket's about. It's actually about the music that's being played at the Simchat Beit Shoeva.
So it's a tiyus stuff.
And it's, hold on, and that is going to make that Braita in a machloket with our Mishnah, and that's going to be the Gemara's discussion, but our Mishnah is a Stam Mishnah. So what's the Braita bringing? Back and forth it'll go. You have to come back next week for that. Adkan for tonight. Have a great night. See you soon. Next week we will have a shiur, and then I think we'll have to be off for Nisan. I'm pretty sure. But next week, let's expect we're gonna have a shiur.